We're going to be looking at Deuteronomy 7 in just a few moments. As we were singing all these songs and as I was hearing Tom pray and Alan lead songs, I don't even... There's so many things that I think about with all of you every day in Atlanta. I was just thinking about all the good memories that so many of us shared together. And nothing is ever going to take those memories away, I guess, unless I get dementia or something. But I'm going to live the rest of my life with so many good memories and so many people that have impacted my family. I remember when Asher was first born and all the good attention he got. There hadn't been a baby for a long time. And he still talks about all of you and all the influence that you guys had on him. And Samantha and I and Abigail and Asher, there's a new one, Hannah, and then there's a fourth one on the way right now. And so pray for us. I love all of you, and it's good to be with you. The book of Deuteronomy is a series of about 3 speeches that Moses gives to the new generation of Israelites as they're getting ready to enter the Promised Land. And at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies, so these are his final words. And when somebody is conscious that they're giving their final words, they're not going to waste any breath. One of the things that Moses warns the people about throughout the book of Deuteronomy is what's in their heart. There's 6 statements in Deuteronomy. You can imagine the new generation as they're getting ready to enter the Promised Land. There's 6 statements that Moses makes in Deuteronomy where he says something to the effect of, do not say in your heart. That you watch what you say to yourself as you go in and conquer the land and you have all of the intimidating giants and things like this. And I find that it's interesting that in the context of giving the law a second time, which is what the word Deuteronomy means, the second law giving, that there's a big concern about the heart. God has always been concerned about the heart. The fact that Moses says, do not say in your heart, or something like that 6 times in the book, shows you that the things he's going to warn the Israelites of are things that you might not have enough boldness to say out loud because you know of how shameful it would be. But the temptation would be that you would say it in your heart. So as we go through these 6 warnings that Moses gave, let's analyze ourselves and ask ourselves, do I ever say anything like this to myself? First one. The first warning that Moses gives is in Deuteronomy 7, starting in verse 17, and we'll read through verse 19. But the first warning is about a fearful heart. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 17 through 19. If you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them? You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and all Egypt, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. So will the Lord your God do to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. This mission of going into the Promised Land and conquering the giants, can you imagine any reason why they might be scared about that? That this new generation, that mom and dad, that my dad who was a soldier, he was too afraid when the spies came back and they said that we're like grasshoppers in their sight in Numbers 13. And now he's telling this new generation that as they're about to come in, he says, do not say in your heart that these nations are too strong and that they're too mighty. You might be saying this to yourself, but you know you're not supposed to say it out loud. Don't even say it to yourself. Do we ever struggle with that? Or maybe there's some hardships that we assume could be part of our near future. Everybody was talking about wanting 2020 to be over, and it seems like 2020 and 2021 are best friends with each other. Does that intimidate you? Don't say in your heart, I don't know how I can handle what seems to be around the future. Or have you ever struggled with some kind of sin that you've tried getting out of your life and you've failed again and again and again? Do not say in your heart that this is too big for me and I cannot do it. Have you ever wanted to start a conversation with somebody about the gospel? And you were afraid that maybe they were going to have too many sophisticated arguments that you wouldn't be able to navigate and reason with people about? Do not say in your heart. Did you see what the text said to do, though? It says to remember the mighty acts of God in verse 18. He says, you remember what God did. Can you imagine that some of these kids being 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and they're going through the Red Sea? Can you imagine them looking up at this giant wall of water? And he's appealing to them and saying, you remember what the Lord has done. Don't you remember His track record? What do you remember? All the difficulties that you've been through and how God has brought you through those, and you're at this moment in your life? Moses is saying to remember that the God who is with you is greater than anything that seems intimidating in our horizon or in our life presently. That's the first warning. Notice the second one in Deuteronomy 8. In the very next chapter, Deuteronomy 8. And look at verses 17 through 20. And this warning is about a self-sufficient heart. So if the first one is a fearful heart, the second one is a self-sufficient heart. Look at Deuteronomy 8, 17 through 20. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth, that He may confirm His covenant that He swore to your fathers as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. You notice what the first word was in verse 17? Beware. When do you use the word beware? Kids running out into the street. The stove is hot. Watch out. You don't use that word casually. And here Moses is saying, beware that when you get into the promised land and that you do actually dispossess these people that you might have been scared of, don't start saying in your heart that the reason that this happened is because of my power, that I've done this by my own strength. Can individuals do that? Where you've started to get more and more successful in your career. And it looks like finances are really good. And it looks like a lot of things in your life are exactly what you've always wanted it to be. Can we ever start to say in our heart, well, it's because of how smart I am. It's because of all the right decisions that I've made. It's because of the talent that I have. Can a nation do that? If this vaccine destroys the Rona, do you think people could... That's what I call it, is the Rona. Do you suppose that people could start saying, well, it's because of the power of our scientists and it's the power of our technology? Do you think families can do this? Families that have peace within them? It's because we've just really made all the right decisions. And you see what Moses is saying here. He says in verse 18 that remember it's God who was the one who gave you this. He's the one that's blessed you. Sure, we have to make the right decisions. But he's warning them, like I think 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7 would say, and this is where I would have my PowerPoint verse, which I can't use right now. What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? If you take all the power that you've exercised in this country, with all the things that you have in this country, let's say for a moment that you were born in one of the poorest countries in the world, would you have what you had if you had the same power and work ethic? You would not have the same things. Don't say in your heart that it's my power that's gotten me what I have. The third one, Deuteronomy 9. Is a warning against a self-righteous heart, which is going to sound somewhat similar to what we just looked at, but there's a difference in it. Look at Deuteronomy 9, verses 4 and 5. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. Whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you are going in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Notice what he's saying here. He's saying that you guys will possess the promised land. And that when that happens, don't say in your heart that it's because I'm just such a goody two-shoes, that I'm so righteous, and that's why God has blessed me in all of these different kinds of ways. How is that different from the self-sufficient heart that we looked at in chapter 8? In the previous one, it was more about my power and my talents. But this one is more about my morality. That the reason that I'm being blessed in the way that I'm being blessed is because I'm just a really moral person, and God is showing me special favor because of that. Is it partly true that if you make good moral decisions, that there will be less earthly problems that you bring into your own life? That's true. But that's not always true. What about Job? But in this case, he's saying when you enter the promised land and you've wiped out the Canaanites and the Amorites and all those other ites and stuff, that you need to remember that it's because God was using you as a vehicle of judgment against the wicked people. I always find it interesting that when people are offended by books like Joshua and the Conquest, that people say, well, it seems like God is an ethnic cleanser. It seems like God was some kind of a racist or something. But imagine for a moment that you lived in the land of Canaan. Do you know what kinds of things people did? They worshipped Molech, for example. This statue that had these outstretched arms where they would burn babies. And the sexual immorality and the cult prostitution at the temples. And if you lived in that time period, do you know what your question would maybe be? Where's the God of justice? Why isn't God doing anything about the wickedness in the world? And then when he does something using the nation of Israel, then we have complaints about that too. God was using the nation to judge these people because of their wickedness. And he gave them many years to repent. And here Moses is saying, it's not because of your righteousness that you've been brought in. It's because of their wickedness. Now, God is blessing you too, but you don't get a hot head about it. You know what happens in our life? If I think that my blessings are just because I'm so moral, and that's why I have so much peace in my life, what happens with that is that when life is really going well, I become arrogant because it was all me. But then what happens when a car accident comes into my life? Or a family member is struck with some kind of disease or something. Something happens in my life that just tears me apart. And I've been thinking all along that it's because of my goodness. As soon as there's some kind of bad thing that happens, I go from being arrogant to just defeated and crushed. And those are the two worlds that you'll live in, if that's your mindset. Notice the third thing, or the fourth one. Look at Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy 15, this is about a begrudging heart. Deuteronomy 15, verses 9 through 11. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be begrudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, to the poor in your land. Now, to understand, I think, what his point is here, what does he mean by the 7th year? He calls it also in this text the year of release. What is that? It's when the debts that you had accrued leading up to that point would be zeroed out. And here Moses is saying there's going to be times when you guys come into the promised land And maybe the 7th year is 6 months away. And you know that if that person comes up to you and says, hey, I need some help, you know that you're not going to get all of that money back in the next 6 months. So you say in your heart, I'm not going to do it. Don't say in your heart something that refuses to withhold something that somebody needs. Can you imagine examples today of what a begrudging heart might look like? There's a lot of different ways people can be poor. It's not just money. Can people be impoverished in friendship, feel isolated and lonely? Has that not been a huge struggle this last year? By the way, Psalm 142 is one of the best chapters in the Bible to deal with loneliness. But have you ever known anybody that didn't have a lot of friends? They felt lonely. And you had opportunities to reach out to that person, but you had a begrudging heart that said, no, that's going to take up more of my bandwidth. I don't know that I can do that. Or if we're always asking ourselves the question, well, I'll go ahead and do this for this person only if I can get something out of it, like it's a transaction mindset about every relationship you ever have. Begrudging mindset. You notice that in verse 9, Moses says that this is an unworthy thought. Well, unworthy for who? Unworthy for God's people. That you do not have that begrudging mindset towards other people who are in need. That's the fourth one. Notice the fifth one in Deuteronomy 18. Go to Deuteronomy 18, where Moses warns of a skeptical heart. Look at Deuteronomy 18 and look at verses 20 through 22. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. Moses, in this context, is giving a prophecy about how there's going to be a prophet that's going to be like himself that comes. But in the meantime, he's warning them about all these other false prophets that are going to come. And the expectation is that the Israelites would know how to discern who's telling the truth and who's lying. By the way, a sermon that I've been wanting to preach for a couple months now is looking at the book of Jeremiah. Can you imagine being one of the Israelites trying to figure out what the truth was? Because you've got, I think the name was Hananiah, the prophet that made these bowls and bull horns on his head, and he was running around saying that the exile is only going to last 2 years and everything's going to be better really quickly. You don't have to worry. And then you've got Jeremiah saying the opposite, but you've got more people that are like the guy with the whatever that was, I think in Jeremiah 28. Can you imagine? It's like different news networks. It's like different things that people are posting all over the place. And you're wondering, what is the truth? And Moses is saying here in verse 20, I like how one version says it. It says, how can we tell the difference whether it was from God who spoke or not? Have you ever had confusion in this last year? What is true? And Moses here is saying, don't tell yourself, how can we know whether or not God has spoken? Don't do that. Now, maybe the person's going, well, I heard that guy, he kind of had like a smooth way of saying stuff. It sounded kind of logical. Like, are we really sure that that's not true? He's saying, don't do that. Do people have that struggle today? There's so many religions. I've had so many studies in Atlanta with people of all kinds of different religious backgrounds. And people can look at Buddhism, and they can look at Hinduism, and they can look at everything else-ism and YouTubeism. And they can, that's a funny thing, and because there's a lot of YouTube videos. And people can go, well, maybe, are we sure that that's not right? Are we sure that that's not right? There's so many denominations, 35,000 denominations by the last time I looked, that claim to follow Jesus and claim to read the Bible. How do we know that they're wrong? There's so many philosophies in the world. What is the test in this text to know if something came from the Lord? Did you see it in verse 22? That if somebody says something and it comes to pass, then you know that it was from the Lord. But if you've got these prophets that have come and they're saying that this and that will happen and then it doesn't happen, you know it wasn't from God. You know, we've all heard the adage before that of all the books in the world, of all the things that you can consume and fill yourself with, this is the only thing that you don't have to ask if it's true or not. We've got prophecies in Micah on where Jesus was going to be born. We've got prophecies in the Bible naming people like King Cyrus 150 years before he ever comes. The ability to predict the future is something that God and God alone has. And we have all of this in the Scriptures. If you want to know what the truth is, if you want to know what you don't have to vet and be able to just totally digest and trust that it's true, it's this. And I think that's a very important message for us right now in so much of the confusing things that are surrounding us. Notice the sixth one. The sixth warning is in Deuteronomy 29, and it's about a stubborn heart. Look at Deuteronomy 29, verses 18 through 20. Deuteronomy 29, verses 18 through 20. Beware lest there be among you a man or a woman or clan or tribe whose heart is turning away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations. Beware lest there be among you a root bearing poisonous and bitter fruit. By the way, Hebrews 12 quotes from that. That's an interesting thing we're not going to get into right now. Look at verse 19. And one who, when he hears the words of this sworn covenant, blesses himself in his heart, saying, I shall be safe, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart. This will lead to the sweeping away of moist and dry alike. The Lord will not be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of the Lord and his jealousy will smoke against that man, and the curses written in this book will settle upon him, and the Lord will blot out his name from under heaven. Maybe another way that you could describe this heart, other than just a stubborn heart, is a heart that for some reason has false security. You've got this person who's blessing himself. By the way, have you ever tried to bless yourself? You know, the person that says, I don't care what anybody thinks about me, I only care what I think about myself. That's this person. And this person is just saying all kinds of good things about himself or herself, saying, I can walk in the stubbornness of my heart. I can go ahead and reject God and keep living in the things that I know He said are wrong, and I'm going to be totally okay. By the way, do you have anything like that in your life? Where you've kept putting off changing something that you know needs to be changed? And maybe in part of your mind you know that that thing needs to change, but then there's this other part of your mind that still thinks you're okay. You realize that those things don't coexist. That if you're willingly, knowingly putting off things that you know ought to change, and God understands that we all need to grow, we're never going to be perfect. But if I'm conscientiously, knowingly putting off things that I know need to change, what does God say is going to happen? That the curses written in this book will come upon such a person. I'll never forget when we were studying the book of Galatians shortly after I got here. And we were talking about people that have this kind of mindset that you can go ahead and live however you want to live, and nothing's ever going to happen on Judgment Day. Galatians 6, verses 7 and 8. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. That's the PowerPoint again. One of the big lessons when I first started reading the Bible, when I got to 1st and 2nd Samuel, one of the first things that I noticed about 1st and 2nd Samuel is that the nation of Israel rejected God, and then they wanted to have a king like the other nations. And God tells Samuel that they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. So we've got this statement in the book of Samuel that says, by God, that I'm being rejected right now. But who still chose Saul? And then who chose David? And then who Who helped David defeat Goliath? And then who preserved the life of David? When the nation of Israel rejected God and thought that they could stubbornly do whatever they wanted to do, it did not dethrone him. You might be thinking that I can keep walking in this stubbornness of my heart. That, I'm not going to have to answer to God one day because I just don't believe Him. But just as gravity is true, and just as it's true that we need oxygen to breathe and to live, God is the judge. Do not say in your heart that I can walk in the stubbornness that I'm harboring and I'm going to be okay. If there's parts of your life that need to change and you know what they are, every day that you delay just hardens it worse and worse and worse. There's one more passage I want to look at. Look at Deuteronomy 30. My sermons have gotten a little longer than they used to be. Deuteronomy 30. After looking at these 6 statements, do you feel like your heart's in a pretty good situation right now? Do you feel like it's totally clean and good? The Israelites, after they've been given these warnings, how did they do for the rest of Old Testament history? Did they guard their hearts? Did they watch them? God is promising through Moses that in Deuteronomy chapter 30, they're going to be sent into exile because of the stubbornness of their heart. All of the calamity that's written in the law would come upon them. But God was going to bring them out of exile, and what was going to be different about them? Look at Deuteronomy 30, verses 5 through 8. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it. And He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord with all of your heart and with all of your soul, that you may live. And the Lord your God will put all these curses on your foes and enemies who persecuted you. And you shall again obey the voice of the Lord and keep all His commandments that I command you today. All right. So the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, when they came out of exile by the decree of Cyrus, or Darius, or whatever it was one of them. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. When they got brought out of exile, they just totally loved God, right? Hearts totally changed. No, not really. The end of Nehemiah, the book of Malachi shows that their heart was still the problem. This is ultimately talking about the new covenant that Jesus is going to establish with us, where our hearts would finally be circumcised. The fleshly desires would finally be removed. How do you know if you've had a circumcised heart? How do you know if your heart's in the right place? Now, one way to analyze that is, do you say those 6 things in your heart that we just looked at? But on the positive side, in verse 6, you know you've had a circumcised heart if you love God. Do you love God? What are you most passionate to talk with about other people? When are you most concerned for others? Do you love God? Is He the passion of your life? Or, if you look at verse 8, there's another one where He says that you will obey all of His commandments. I remember when I was a new Christian, and I had this idea that a Pharisee was somebody, or my family had this idea, that a Pharisee was somebody that just wanted to study the Bible and do what it said. That's a Pharisee. And then you've got passages like this that say, you know you have a genuinely circumcised heart when what you want to do and what you ought to do have become the same thing. That's our struggle, isn't it? Isn't it the case that so often in our lives that we know what the right thing to do is, but we don't want to, we don't have the strength, we don't have the motivation to do it? Circumcised heart makes obligation and love be part of the same package. Well, if that's part of the new covenant and how that works, what was ever going to happen? How is that ever going to happen? In Romans chapter 5, verses 5 through 8, here's the PowerPoint again. God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. For while you were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly, us. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows His love for us, and that while we were still sinners, while you were still a sinner, while I was still a sinner, Christ died for us. What are you filling your hearts with? I have to tell you that in this last year, I got so distracted with the news. And all kinds of news podcasts, and what the news is saying, and what people on Facebook are saying. And then I got off Facebook. Sorry, you don't get to see pictures of the kids anymore. I do miss that part of it. Have we filled ourselves with a bunch of stuff that just doesn't need to be there this last year? And if it's true that the years 2020 and 2021 are going to be good friends with each other, maybe we would do well to meditate more on how much Jesus loves us. And that if we did that more and more, I think it would remove fear. I think it would remove self-sufficiency. I think it would remove skepticism. The more and more we drink from that well, the less and less it's going to be polluted with garbage. I love all of you very much. It's been good to be back with all of you. There's been many moments this last week where I have wept over the good memories that we all shared together. And there's an opportunity if anybody needs to change their heart. If anybody needs to get their heart right with God. We're about to sing the song. Is it 331? 332. We're about to sing the song 332. I surrender all. If there's anybody that needs to do that this morning, this is an opportunity for you to do that. Again, I can't say it. I don't know the right words to say, but it's so good to be with all of you. Thank you for continuing to meet in these times. I pray about you. I think about you often. We're about to sing this song. If anybody has any needs, please come forward while we stand and while we sing.